It started with a single body. A quiet discovery on a lonely stretch of sand. No footprints. No struggle. Just a man, seated, motionless, as if he had simply stopped existing. In his pocket, just one thing. A torn scrap of paper. 2 words, meaningless to some. But for those who understand, it is a message. A warning. A secret buried so deep that, decades later, no one has uncovered the truth. Half a world away, in the silence of a frozen valley, another discovery. A woman, found where no one should be. Her body burned beyond recognition. No past. No name. No identity at all. Whoever she was, she had gone to great lengths to disappear, or someone had done it for her. Then, there were the children. 4 teenagers. A night beneath the stars. A trip that should have ended with laughter, with stories told around a fire. But by morning, 3 were gone. The 4th, the only one left alive, told a story that changed with every telling. Years later, in a quiet town, 2 young girls go for a walk. A simple, ordinary walk. They smile. They talk. They film the world around them. And in those final, fleeting moments, they capture something no one was ever meant to see. And in the desert, a secret. Hidden beneath the sand, just beneath the surface. A single bone, buried in the dust. Then another. And another. 11 bodies, concealed for years in a place where no one was supposed to look. Some mysteries are never solved. Some answers are never found. And some questions, were never meant to be asked. These are not just stories. These are real. Unanswered. Unresolved. And tonight, we begin. Story 1. The morning was like any other. The tide came in, washing over the smooth sands of Somerton Beach. A few early risers walked along the shore, their footprints the only marks on an otherwise undisturbed landscape. The sky was soft with the first light of dawn, the air carrying the familiar scent of salt and seaweed. But then, they saw him. A man, sitting against the seawall. Legs stretched out, ankles crossed. His head tilted slightly to the right, as if he had fallen asleep under the stars and never woken up. At first, no one thought much of it. A drifter, perhaps. A traveler resting after a long journey. But as the hours passed, something became clear: he wasn't moving. He hadn't moved at all. Someone stepped closer. They called out to him. No response. Another step. Close enough now to see the details. The polished shoes. The neatly pressed suit, perfectly clean despite the damp air. The freshly shaven face, untouched by the grime of the beach. The quiet stillness of a man who did not belong there. They reached out. A hand to his shoulder. A small shake, firm but careful. And then, nothing. The man was gone. And yet, there wasn't a single mark on him. No bruises. No wounds. No sign of struggle. Just a body, dressed for an occasion no one could name, left in a place where no one could explain. By the time the authorities arrived, the tide had shifted. The morning sun had risen higher in the sky, casting long shadows over the sand. Officers examined him carefully, searching for answers in the quiet details. His pockets. His clothes. Anything that might tell them who he was, where he had come from, or why he had ended up here. His suit bore no labels. No tags, no identifying marks. Every label had been carefully removed, as if someone had taken the time to erase him before leaving him behind. And then, they found it. A tiny scrap of paper, tucked deep into the pocket of his trousers. No name. No address. Just 2 words, printed in an unfamiliar script. Words that carried a meaning neither the officers nor the doctors could have predicted. Temam should. His fingerprints were taken, carefully inked and recorded. They were sent across the country, compared against thousands of records. But nothing came back. No matches. No history. His dental records, meticulously examined, held no connection to any known person. Not a single clue as to where he had come from or who might be missing him. The man did not exist. At least, not in any way that could be traced. Authorities turned to his clothing. His suit was sharp, expensive, carefully tailored. His shoes, polished. Not the attire of a drifter or someone living on the streets. And yet, not a single label remained. Every tag, every identifying mark had been removed with precision. As if someone had gone to great lengths to erase where they had come from. Then, a discovery. Something small. Something unexpected. The detectives checked his pockets again. Alongside the scrap of paper with those two haunting words, asterisk tamam should asterisk, they found a rolled-up cigarette. But inside, where tobacco should have been, was something else. Something that did not belong. It was a fragment from a book. Not just any book, a rare, nearly forgotten collection of Persian poetry known as asterisk the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. It should have meant nothing. A coincidence, perhaps. But then, something impossible happened. A man stepped forward, claiming he had found something unusual in the back seat of his unlocked car, abandoned in a city street not far from the beach. It was the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. A rare edition. The very same book from which the scrap of paper had been torn. On the back of the book, an indentation. Someone had pressed down hard while writing, leaving behind faint, almost invisible markings. A code. Letters and symbols arranged in a sequence no one could understand. A pattern that didn't quite make sense. A message that refused to be solved. Who was he? A lost traveler? A spy? Someone who knew something they shouldn't have. Authorities followed the only lead they had left. A telephone number, scrawled in the back of the book, belonging to a woman who lived nearby. When the woman saw the man's photograph, she gasped. Her hand trembled. Her face went pale. For a moment, it seemed as if she had seen a ghost. Then, she denied knowing him. And just like that, the last thread of the mystery began to unravel. Decades have passed, and yet, the questions remain. Who was the man on Samarkand Beach? Why did he have no identification, no records, no past? And the most haunting question of all, how did he die? There was no obvious cause. No wounds. No signs of struggle. No history of illness. His body, though lifeless, showed no trace of what had ended it. But when the autopsy results came back, something was off. His spleen was enlarged, 3 times the normal size. His liver was congested with blood. The organs hinted at poisoning, yet no toxins were found. No traces of anything lethal. It was as if whatever had killed him had vanished without a trace. Experts examined the evidence, searching for anything they had missed. A rare book. A cryptic message. A woman whose reaction was louder than her denial. But no answers. Just more questions. Some believed he was a spy, an agent caught in the shadows of a Cold War battle no one ever knew about. The strange code in the book. A cipher. The missing labels on his clothes. A precaution. The unknown poison. A method designed to leave no trace. It was the perfect cover-up. A death carefully orchestrated, leaving behind nothing but silence. Others thought it was something far more personal. A love affair gone wrong. A man with a past too complicated to escape. Some whispered that the woman who had seen his face, the one who gasped but refused to speak, knew more than she admitted. That he had come back for her. That someone had made sure he never left. But the truth? The truth remains buried. Investigators have searched. Historians have examined every detail. Cryptographers have analyzed the strange, scribbled code, hoping to unlock the meaning hidden in those letters. But the pages remain unreadable. The words, unsolved. And the man himself? Still nameless. Still unknown. The case of the Somerton man has outlived everyone who first tried to solve it. Yet, even now, after all these years, no one knows who he was. No one knows why he was there. No one knows what happened in the final hours before he sat down on that beach for the last time. Perhaps the answer was lost long ago. Or perhaps it was never meant to be found. But this next case. It's even stranger. Story 2. The mountains stretch for miles, quiet and undisturbed. A place where the world feels distant, where time seems to slow. In the Istallan Valley, the silence is heavy, and eerie, suffocating quiet. Few wander here. Fewer stay. It was late November, the air crisp with the first breath of winter. A lone hiker made his way through the valley, following a trail that was rarely traveled. The trees stood bare, their twisted branches reaching toward an overcast sky. The ground beneath his boots was uneven, scattered with stones and damp leaves. And then, he saw it. Just ahead, among the rocks, something out of place. Something the forest had not put there. A shape, darkened, motionless. The man hesitated. His breath, visible in the cold air, came slower now. He took a step closer. And then another. And another. A woman. Her body lay stretched across the earth, as if she had fallen and never risen again. Her arms curled unnaturally at her sides. Her skin, blackened. Charred. The ground around her scorched. Whatever had happened here had been violent, consuming. But there was no sign of a struggle. No footprints leading away. No clues left behind. Just her. And then, the details. Her face, unrecognizable. The fire had taken that from her. But it was her hands that told a different story. Her fingertips, completely smooth. No ridges. No prints. As if someone had erased them on purpose. Nearby, scattered among the rocks, were objects that only deepened the mystery. Pills. Fragments of what once had been a passport, now burned beyond recognition. Strange notes, written in a way that made no immediate sense. There was no bag. No identification. Nothing to say who she was or why she was here. The authorities arrived, and with them, more questions. The body was examined. The scene was searched. But the more they looked, the less they understood. There was no record of her. No missing persons report. No name that matched. The Istal woman, as she would come to be known, had appeared as suddenly as she had vanished. And now, she was gone, leaving behind nothing but ash and questions. No one knew where she had come from. No one knew what had happened to her. But whatever the truth was, it had been carefully hidden. A woman with no name. A fire that left no past behind. The authorities thought answers would come quickly. They didn't. The more they searched, the less they understood. The deeper they dug, the stranger it became. It started with the suitcase. A few days after the discovery, investigators searched a train station in Bergen, nearly 10 miles from where she was found. There, in the storage lockers, they found it, an unclaimed piece of luggage, tagged with a date that placed it there just before her death. Inside, there were clothes, carefully folded. Shoes, unworn. A pair of sunglasses. Several wigs. But it was what wasn't there that stood out the most. Just like the man on Somerton Beach, every single clothing label had been removed. No names, no brands, no hints of where they had come from. As if someone had made sure she could never be traced. Then, they found the notebooks. Pages filled with numbers, symbols, and words that didn't seem to form any recognizable pattern. Coded messages. Not random scribbles, not nonsense, but something meant to be read by someone who understood the key. The authorities didn't. They studied her belongings, trying to piece together a life that had already been erased. A matchbox from a hotel. A receipt from a shop. Small clues, barely enough to hold on to. Then, the discoveries began to spread. Hotels in multiple cities reported a woman who matched her description. She had stayed in different places under different names. Some knew her as Genevieve Lancier, others as Claudia Tielt. In another place, she was Alexia Zarnamerches. The names changed, but the woman was always the same. She paid in cash. She kept to herself. And yet, something about her lingered in the minds of those who had seen her. Witnesses came forward. A hotel worker remembered how she had refused to let anyone near her belongings. A shopkeeper recalled that she spoke in different accents, slipping between languages without hesitation. Norwegian. French. German. Some swore they had heard her speak Russian. Each person who had met her had a different version of her. As if she had never been just one person at all. Then, the autopsy report arrived. At first, it confirmed what was already known. The fire had been intense, hot enough to burn the body, yet strangely, not the surroundings. But beneath that, something else emerged. Traces of poison. Not enough to kill instantly. Not enough to leave obvious signs. But enough to weaken. Enough to disorient. Enough to ensure that when the fire came, she wouldn't fight it. The investigators had been looking for a victim. Now, they weren't sure if they had found one, or if she had been something else entirely. The Istil woman wasn't just unknown. She was unknowable. A puzzle with missing pieces. A presence that had passed through cities, changing names, changing faces, leaving behind only questions. And now, she had left one final mystery: why had she come to the valley? And who had made sure she would never leave it? No name. No home. No past. The woman in the valley should have been a person, someone with a life, a history, a story to tell. Instead, she was a mystery written in ashes, a presence that existed only in fragments. But mysteries do not stay buried forever. Theories emerged, each one trying to make sense of the impossible. Some believed she had been running, from whom, no one could say. Others were certain she had been searching for something. But the most chilling theory of all: that she had been found. The pieces of her life, however scattered, painted a picture of someone who was not meant to be known. The coded messages. The false names. The way she seemed to slip between languages, effortlessly adapting to wherever she was. These were not the habits of an ordinary traveler. These were the signs of someone trained to disappear. A spy. The year was 1970. The world was gripped by quiet, invisible wars. Intelligence agencies moved in shadows, their operatives leaving no trace. Secrets passed between hands that never met twice. And those who knew too much, they simply ceased to exist. Some believe the Istil woman had been one of them, a courier, an informant, a ghost caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. The poison in her system. A way to ensure she couldn't speak. The fire. A way to erase her entirely. But if she had been a spy, who had silenced her? And why? Others saw something different. A woman entangled in something dangerous. Something she could no longer escape. The witnesses who saw her in the days before she died described more than just a woman keeping to herself. They described someone watching over her shoulder. Someone who seemed aware that time was running out. Did she know what was coming? Had she tried to run? One theory suggests she wasn't alone in the valley that night. That there was someone with her. Someone who made sure she never left. And then, there are those who think the truth is something else entirely. That she was neither a spy nor a fugitive, but someone whose life ended in tragedy, shrouded in circumstances too strange to explain. But there is one fact no theory can change. She is still unidentified. Despite advancements in forensics, in DNA, in the very science that should be able to name her, she remains unknown. The files have been reopened. The case has been studied. But she remains a question without an answer. Even now, over 50 years later, the Istal woman is no closer to being found than she was that cold November day. Somewhere, buried beneath time, is the truth. Whether it will ever be uncovered, no one can say. One woman, burned beyond recognition. But what about a group of teenagers, whose trip into the woods ended in terror? Story 3. The water of Lake Bodom stretches wide and still, cradled by dense Finnish forests. A place untouched by the rush of the world, where the only sounds come from the whispering trees and the occasional splash of a fish breaking the surface. It was here, along the quiet shoreline, that 4 teenagers set up camp on a warm summer evening in June 1960. They were young. 17, 18. The kind of age where the future seems endless, where the night holds nothing but promise. Their tents were pitched close to the water. The fire flickered, reflecting off the gentle waves. Somewhere in the trees, an owl called, its voice breaking the night's silence. It was supposed to be just another camping trip. A night beneath the stars. But by morning, the peaceful lake would become a scene of horror. Hours before dawn, something happened in the darkness. Something no one saw. No one heard. No one could explain. By the time the sun rose, 3 of them were dead. Their bodies lay crumpled inside the collapsed tent, torn open from the outside. The canvas, once white, was slashed to ribbons, stained dark with blood. Their injuries were brutal. Blunt force. Stabbing. Wounds so violent, so frenzied, it was as if whoever had done this had wanted more than just to kill. And then, there was the 4th. The only one who survived. He was found outside, barely conscious, his face swollen, his body battered. He should have been dead, like the others. But he wasn't. And when he finally spoke, his story made no sense. He didn't know what had happened. He didn't remember. Or maybe, he did. The police arrived. The crime scene was examined. The lake, the trees, the ground around the campsite, everything was searched. But there was nothing. No footprints. No weapon. No clear sign of who had done this. A massacre in the night. A single survivor. And a mystery that, even decades later, refuses to give up its secrets. The scene was chaos. A nightmare frozen in time. 3 bodies, their lives taken in a way that seemed almost frantic, almost desperate. A massacre, yet no sign of an attacker. No clear motive. No weapon left behind. In the aftermath, investigators combed through the remains of the campsite, retracing the steps of those who had spent the night beneath the stars. But the more they searched, the more questions they uncovered. The lone survivor, the boy who had somehow escaped the carnage, was their only witness. But his account, well, it was as fragmented as the scene he had stumbled away from. At first, he couldn't remember anything. Then, his memories returned, sketchy, unreliable flashes of a dark figure, a noise, a blur of movement. He couldn't explain why he had survived, why he had been left untouched while his friends had been slaughtered. As the days passed, his version of events shifted. One moment, he claimed to have heard footsteps in the night. A shadow moving between the tents. Another moment, he was sure the attack had come from someone he knew, a friend, an acquaintance, someone who had been there with him. But when pressed, his answers wavered. The facts never stayed in place. The inconsistencies piled up, leaving investigators no closer to the truth than they had been the day the bodies were found. And then, just when they thought they had reached an impasse, something strange happened. A man, years later, came forward. He had been living with the knowledge of what happened that night for decades, and he couldn't stay silent any longer. This man claimed to have been the killer. He said the attacks were an accident, an outburst, an unplanned outpouring of rage. He confessed to what he had done, offering up details only someone who had been there could know. The confession came too late. The bodies were buried. The case was cold. But the confession, it was hard to ignore. Still, there was a problem. The details didn't entirely match up. Some of the man's claims were inconsistent with the physical evidence. His story, though chilling, seemed to stretch the truth in places. Could he have been the killer? Or was there more to this story? Was there a deeper truth buried beneath layers of doubt and deceit? Each new lead took investigators down a darker path, only to fade away into nothing. The survivors' conflicting accounts, the confessions that came years too late, each piece of the puzzle left them further from the truth. With no weapon found, no clear evidence, no explanation for the survivors' strange and shifting memories, the case became something more than a murder investigation. It became a question of what could truly be known, what could ever truly be uncovered when even those closest to the crime couldn't agree on what had happened. And as the years passed, the darkness surrounding Lake Bodom seemed to grow. It was as if the lake itself was hiding something, as if the very ground beneath those trees held the answers, and yet refused to reveal them. The mystery lingers, still unsolved, still elusive. What if the truth is closer than anyone imagined? What if the one person who survived the massacre was actually the one who committed the crime? The questions linger, casting a long shadow over Lake Bodom, stretching into the years that followed. The survivor's story never held steady. First, he was confused, shaken, disoriented, barely able to recall the details of the attack. Then, over time, as he was questioned again and again, his story began to change. It was as if the more he spoke, the further away the truth seemed to drift. In one account, he spoke of an unknown assailant, someone who came out of the night, a shadow moving between the trees. In another, he described the terror he felt as his friends were attacked, but said nothing of his own role in the events that unfolded. And when his account started to falter, suspicion began to grow. Could the survivor have been the killer all along? Some pointed to the contradictions in his story, the discrepancies in his recollection of the attack, the gaps in his memory that seemed to form right where the violence occurred. How could he have survived with only scratches, while his friends were left brutalized, their bodies mutilated? Was his own fear the result of guilt? Or was it the truth, twisted by the passage of time and the weight of surviving something no one should have to witness? As the years passed, the authorities re-examined the evidence, piecing together the small fragments they had. They considered every possibility, from a jealous dispute among friends to a random killer stalking the woods. But as the years wore on, and the investigation grew colder, they began to wonder if they were chasing shadows. Perhaps the killer never left the area at all. What if an unknown assailant had attacked the teens and disappeared into the dense Finnish forest, vanishing without a trace? The dense trees, the impenetrable darkness, offered the perfect cover. Perhaps they had fled after the carnage, walking away without a single clue left behind. Could they have escaped, their identity forever lost to the night? But then, there were those who insisted that the survivor knew more than he was telling. Maybe he was hiding something, a truth too dangerous to admit. His strange behavior in the days after the murders only added to the suspicion. He seemed to withdraw, to retreat into himself, even as his accounts of the night shifted. He didn't seem to want to remember what happened. Or perhaps he remembered too much. There were whispers that he had been the one to start the chaos, an argument gone wrong, a burst of violence that ended in tragedy. But what if his memory was the key to unlocking everything? Was it possible that the survivor could have been covering up a dark secret, one that had haunted him for decades? And so the questions festered. Were they looking in the wrong direction entirely? Or had the answer been right in front of them all along? One brutal night. One survivor. And the unsettling possibility that justice was never truly served. But the most chilling part of this story? The one detail that lingers in the air, unanswered: what if a victim had captured their own killer on video? What if, in the moments before the attack, someone had been able to record the face of their killer, the last glimpse of a nightmare unfolding before them. One night. One killer. And no justice. But what happens when the victim knows the truth? What happens when the camera captures it all? Story 4. Delphi, Indiana. A small town, known for its peaceful charm and quiet streets. A place where everyone knew everyone, and where the days passed without much thought of the dark things that might lie beyond the ordinary. It was on a warm February day in 2017 that two best friends, Abby Williams and Libby German, set out on a hike along the Monon High Bridge Trail. They were close, like sisters, always together, always laughing, always talking. They had grown up in the town, spent countless hours playing in the woods, running through the fields, exploring the small, familiar places that made up their world. The trail was only about a mile long, stretching over a railway bridge that arched high above a quiet creek. The kind of place where kids went to explore, take pictures, maybe whisper secrets to each other. But on that day, everything would change. The two girls, walking in the cool afternoon, disappeared. No one knew where they had gone, no one heard their cries. The last time they were seen was by a man who would later be identified only by a haunting recording, an image that no one could forget. By the time their families realized something was wrong, it was too late. Abby and Libby never returned home. Hours stretched into days as the search for the girls intensified, the entire town of Delphi coming together to look for them. But it wasn't until the third day that the discovery came, a discovery that would haunt the town, the families, and the investigators forever. The bodies of Abby and Libby were found, just off the trail, near the old railway bridge. But it was what was found with them that made this case unlike any other. Libby's phone. The camera that had been running. There, in the depths of the woods, hidden in the moments before tragedy struck, the girls had managed to leave behind a chilling clue, an audio recording that captured a voice. A voice that would be replayed over and over in the investigation that followed. The voice of a man. Down the hill. The words hung in the air, haunting in their simplicity. It was a clue, one that would lead investigators down a path filled with more questions than answers. What happened on that bridge? Who was the man in the recording? Why had he targeted the girls? There were no answers yet. Only fragments, whispers of a story that remained untold. But one thing was certain, what happened on that day, in those woods, was not just a tragedy. It was a mystery, a cold case that refused to fade into the background, demanding attention from anyone who dared to listen. And as the town of Delphi grappled with the aftermath, the world would come to learn just how far this story would stretch, how it would pull on the threads of a small town's fabric, and unravel something far more terrible than anyone could have imagined. The voices of Abby and Libby, though silenced in life, would carry on in the recording they left behind. Their story, and the mystery that still haunts Delphi, was far from over. It wasn't just a crime scene investigators found that day. It wasn't just another tragic loss. Because in the moments before everything changed, Libby German did something no one expected. She turned on her phone. It was a decision made in an instant, a reaction to something she must have felt, something that sent a quiet warning through her, something that told her to press record. And what she captured was more than enough to haunt anyone who listened. The screen flickered as the camera focused, catching only a glimpse of a man. His face, obscured by shadow. His movements, deliberate. He wasn't running. He wasn't panicked. He was walking, closing the distance between himself and the two girls. The recording was brief. But it was enough. Then, a voice. Deep. Unshaken. A command. Guys, down the hill. 3 words. That was all. 3 words that would echo through the years, replayed by investigators, analyzed by experts, dissected by thousands searching for answers. There was something chilling in the way he said it. No urgency. No hesitation. As if this moment had already played out in his mind. As if he already knew what was coming next. The video ended abruptly. What happened after was left in darkness. Libby and Abby never had the chance to tell their story. But in those final moments, they left behind a clue, a single thread in a mystery that should have unraveled everything. And yet, it didn't. The man in the footage was a phantom. He wasn't a stranger lurking in the background of someone else's life, he was real, standing right there, in broad daylight, on a public trail, walking toward his victims with unnerving calm. And still, no one could say his name. Investigators released the video to the public. They enhanced the audio, hoping someone, somewhere, would recognize the voice. But no one did. Or worse, maybe someone did, and stayed silent. The town of Delphi changed that day. The bridge, once a place of childhood adventure, became something else entirely. A landmark of loss. A place weighted by unanswered questions. And the man in the recording? He vanished. Not into the night. Not into an underground network of criminals or the shadows of some distant city. No. He walked away. Back into the town. Back into the world. Back into a life where no one suspected him. He could have been anyone. A neighbor. A coworker. A familiar face at the grocery store. And as days turned into months, and months into years, one question remained. Had he ever left at all? There was video evidence. A voice recording. A face, partially hidden, but there. Pieces of a puzzle that, by all logic, should have led to one undeniable truth. And yet, the case grew colder. Theories swirled. Whispers spread. People searched for answers, pointing fingers in every direction. Because somewhere, buried beneath speculation and fear, was a single question no one could escape. Who was the man on the bridge? For years, investigators chased leads. Names surfaced, each one carrying a different kind of weight. A local man, known for his troubling past. A drifter, passing through town at just the right, or the wrong, time. Even a convicted murderer, already behind bars for another crime. Each suspect was examined. Each possibility explored. And yet, each time, the same dead end. For a while, one name stood out, someone familiar, someone close. A man who had interacted with the girls online. Who had a past that raised questions. Who lived just a little too close to the scene of the crime. But as much as people wanted certainty, it never came. The town waited. Families held on to hope. But justice remained just out of reach. And then, something shifted. Years after the murders, authorities announced an arrest. A man named Richard Allen. He had lived in Delphi all along. Walked the same streets. Shopped in the same stores. Moved through life unnoticed, while the search for Abby and Libby's killer stretched on. His connection to the case was unclear. The evidence against him, still shrouded in secrecy. But his name was now linked to the crime, and the question remained, was he truly the man from the bridge? Or had the real killer been watching, waiting, letting someone else take the fall? The Delphi case wasn't just about two girls lost too soon. It was a warning. A reminder that sometimes, the answers we seek aren't buried in the unknown, but hidden in plain sight. And as the world waited for the final truth, another mystery loomed. A case with no video. No voice recording. No final clue left behind. Because while Abby and Libby's story shook a town, another would unearth something even darker. 11 women. One stretch of desert. And not a single trace of the man who put them there. Story 5. February 2nd, 2009. It was supposed to be an ordinary day. A woman taking her dog for a walk, following a familiar path along the edge of Albuquerque's West Mesa. A routine, nothing more. But then, her dog stopped. Something had caught its attention in the dirt. Not a rock. Not debris left behind by the wind. Something different. Something that made her take a second look. And that was when she saw it. A bone. At first, maybe she wanted to believe it was nothing. A remnant from an animal, half buried in the sand. But as she looked closer, a terrible realization set in. This wasn't just a bone. This was human. She called the police. Officers arrived, walking carefully across the uneven ground, their eyes scanning the dry, cracked earth. They roped off the area, marking the spot where the bone had been found. At that moment, no one could have imagined what lay beneath their feet. The digging began. And the deeper they went, the more they uncovered. One set of remains, then another. And another. And another. Until, finally, the truth could no longer be ignored. They weren't looking at a single tragedy. They were standing above a graveyard. Buried beneath the West Mesa were the bodies of 11 women. 11 lives, lost and discarded in the desert, hidden beneath the dust and silence. And yet, for all the horror of the discovery, one question loomed above the rest. How long had they been there? And more importantly, who had put them there? The bodies told a story. Different ages. Different backgrounds. But one chilling connection. Most of them had been sex workers. Women who had slipped through the cracks of society, living on the fringes, unnoticed, until they vanished. And in Albuquerque, that wasn't unusual. For years, women had been disappearing. Their faces appearing on missing person posters, their families left with questions that had no answers. Some thought they had simply left town. Moved on. Started over. But now, standing over the mass grave in the West Mesa, police knew the truth. They hadn't left. They had been taken. Investigators retraced their last known movements. The streets they worked. The places they were last seen. And one location kept coming up. A truck stop. A stretch of road frequented by travelers, by strangers passing through. The kind of place where people come and go without notice. Where a single interaction can slip through memory like sand through fingers. And somewhere in that blur of faces, of headlights disappearing into the night, was the killer. A man who had watched them. Chosen them. Followed them into the darkness, knowing that no one would come looking. For years, he had operated in silence. For years, he had buried his secrets beneath the desert. And now, for the first time, the world was beginning to see the horror he had left behind. But the question remained, who was he? And why had he stopped? The bodies told a story. Different ages. Different backgrounds. But one chilling connection. Most of them had been sex workers. Women who had slipped through the cracks of society, living on the fringes, unnoticed, until they vanished. And in Albuquerque, that wasn't unusual. For years, women had been disappearing. Their faces appearing on missing person posters, their families left with questions that had no answers. Some thought they had simply left town. Moved on. Started over. But now, standing over the mass grave in the West Mesa, police knew the truth. They hadn't left. They had been taken. Investigators retraced their last known movements. The streets they worked. The places they were last seen. And one location kept coming up. A truck stop. A stretch of road frequented by travelers, by strangers passing through. The kind of place where people come and go without notice. Where a single interaction can slip through memory like sand through fingers. And somewhere in that blur of faces, of headlights disappearing into the night, was the killer. A man who had watched them. Chosen them. Followed them into the darkness, knowing that no one would come looking. For years, he had operated in silence. For years, he had buried his secrets beneath the desert. And now, for the first time, the world was beginning to see the horror he had left behind. But the question remained, who was he? And why had he stopped? Who put them there? The search for answers led detectives down a maze of dead ends and theories. They combed through records of missing women. They reconstructed their last movements. They interviewed family members, friends, and anyone who might have seen something. But the more they searched, the clearer it became, whoever did this had covered their tracks well. And then, a name surfaced. Lorenzo Montoya. A man with a violent past. A history of run-ins with law enforcement. And a chilling pattern, connections to several of the victims who had disappeared. Police turned their attention to him. But before they could bring him in for questioning, before they could press him for the truth, he was dead. Shot and killed by a woman he had lured to his home, a woman who fought back before she could become another statistic. With his death, any answers he might have held were lost forever. For some, it seemed too convenient. A man with a violent record, tied to a crime that would never be solved. Case closed. But others weren't so sure. If Montoya was the killer, why had the bodies stopped appearing before his death? And if he wasn't responsible, then the real question was far more unsettling. Had the killer simply moved on? Found new hunting grounds? New victims? To this day, no arrests have been made. No one has been charged. 11 women, lost to the desert. Their killer, never found. And as the sun sets over the West Mesa, casting long shadows across the sand, he may still be out there. Watching. Waiting. A man found dead on an Australian beach. No name. No past. Only a cryptic note in his pocket, as if he had written his own final words. A woman, burned beyond recognition in the icy wilderness of Norway. No fingerprints. No identity. Just a suitcase filled with disguises and a past erased with precision. A camping trip meant for adventure. 3 young lives cut short. And the only survivor, his story shifting like the wind. 2 best friends, walking across an old bridge, capturing the moment, and unknowingly recording their own killer. And 11 women, discarded in the desert. Their voices silenced. Their killer, invisible. Each case, a puzzle with missing pieces. Each victim, a person with a life, a story, a future that was stolen. The Tamamshud case. The Istil woman. The Lake Boda murders. The Delphi murders. The West Mesa murders. Somewhere, the truth is out there. Maybe in a lost police report, a forgotten photograph, a memory locked away in the mind of someone who saw something they didn't understand. Maybe the answers are waiting to be uncovered. Or maybe, they never will be. What do you think? Which case haunts you the most? Do you believe any of these mysteries will ever be solved? Let me know in the comments below. And if you're drawn to the cases that leave more questions than answers, then subscribe and like, you won't want to miss what's next. Because some crimes are so unsettling, they stay with you long after the video ends. Stay curious. Stay cautious. And I'll see you in the next story.